Back in my 20s, I was what you might call an adventurer. About 10 years ago, give or take, something happened that changed that. I moved to the city and got a boring job and a boring apartment, and became decidedly adverse to the outdoors. I haven't really told anyone about it in all that time, save my now wife because, well, for one, they would think I'm crazy, and for two, I don't want to think about it. I'm finally putting it here though, because you all deserve to hear it. After all, you probably saved my life. At the time, I had just graduated college and moved from Texas to Alaska out of a desire for, you guessed it, adventure. I had a job doing stuff that I liked. It paid well and gave me enough vacation days to get out and do something really adventurous every once in a while. One thing that I had had on my bucket list since moving north was driving the Dalton Highway. For the unfamiliar, that's a highway, in generous terms, that goes from Fairbanks to Prudhoe Bay on the Arctic Ocean. It's a 500-mile, 11-hour drive in the summer. But thanks to work realities, I wasn't able to get out there until early autumn. By early autumn, the snow had already started, but the plows were still able to keep the highway pretty clear. And I was driving a '95 Toyota Land Cruiser, kitted out for expeditions. Man, I love that thing. Besides that, I was an adventurer. I was prepared. I had camping gear, emergency gear, a satellite phone, plenty of food and water, enough jerry cans for the trip there and back, and Sam Colt's greatest invention in the center console, just in case. For the unfamiliar, that's a 1911. I also love that gun. I was planning to make the trip in 2 days' time, sleeping in the back of the Land Cruiser halfway. I had enough blankets to keep warm, and I had a nice comfy space back there that I could fit in. I would have to drive slower because of the snow. I also wanted to enjoy the scenery, and the sun was setting pretty early by that time of the year. I had a good start that day, and the driving seemed fine. By the time that crap went down, it had been dark for about an hour, and I was getting into the foothills of the Brooks Range. That's good scenery and also terrain that I didn't want to be going through in the darkness. So I was just about ready to pull over for the night when I saw caution flashers up ahead. For the unfamiliar, a hard rule for any Alaskan is that you always pull over when you see someone in distress on the side of a remote road like that, especially after the snow has started falling. If they aren't prepared for an emergency, there's a very good chance that you could save their life. So, that's exactly what I did. I pulled over next to the Nissan SUV. Not as nicely kitted out as mine, but not bad either. I figured they were doing the same thing that I was. Small world, isn't it? By the jack under one axle and the wheels sitting next to the car, it looked like they had blown a tire. What I didn't see, though, were the people. I got out of my Land Cruiser, crunching down into the snow, and I looked around. There aren't a ton of trees that far north, and there are quite a few patches of evergreens. While not quite forests, it can be pretty dark and thick on a snowy night. "Hey," I called, my voice going dead a few yards away as sound does in the snowy woods. "Y'all need some help?" No answer. Dead silence save the faint clicking over the flasher from inside of their Nissan. I shouted again. "Anybody there? I've got tools that can help ya." No answer. Dead silence. I considered myself a pretty brave person back then, but I'll admit that I was creeped out at this point. This vehicle definitely hadn't been there for all that long, but there was no one to be seen. And besides that, the dead quiet and the darkness of the night were unnerving. It wasn't that weird for it to be this silent on a snowy night like this, that far north, but nonetheless, still creepy. And creepy enough that I hopped back in the car and grabbed my .45, storing it in one of my big pockets in the front of my jacket, just in case. There were bears up there. I approached the Nissan and saw footprints in the snow. Okay, good, not a ghost car. One pair had been crouched down at the removed tire, and the other had been standing only a couple feet away, by the rear of the SUV. The latter pair had then at some point headed off towards the tree line. It stopped a few yards down, paced around a bit, and then continued on into the woods. The pair near the tire had then presumably later gotten up and ran after the first. I was no tracker, but it's not hard to tell when somebody was running in the snow. Now, I was really creeped out. I was tempted to hop back in the car and keep driving for a good long while. But hey, like I said, this could have easily been life or death up there. And besides, I had my .45. It could handle the grizzly. Probably. That was the worst that I would find up here. Probably. So off I went, following those two sets of footprints deep into the woods. It was really dark, but don't worry, y'all. I had a really nice flashlight. Surefire, baby. Adventure girl, remember? The dead quiet seemed to get even deader and quieter as soon as I passed the tree line, as sound does in the snowy woods. Probably. The only thing comforting me that I hadn't gone deaf was the sound of my breath and my boots crunching in the snow. Hey, I called again, maybe 20 yards into the woods. Is everyone okay? This time, I got a response. It was a woman's voice and it sounded afraid. Over here, it called. Help. I got a spring in my step at that, jogging towards the sound of the voice, shining my light through the trees to try and catch a glimpse. Over here, it called again, much closer. Help. I remember when I said that y'all probably saved my life. This is when that happened. I stopped. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end, and I had a chill run down my spine. Something was off about that voice. I couldn't put a finger on it, but it was just slightly wrong. I pointed my light toward where I had heard it. Are you hurt? I said, voice raised, but not quite shouting anymore. Help! The voice called again, only it was even closer this time. I hadn't heard the crunch of any footsteps. Over here. My grip on my flashlight tightened and my heart started to hammer in my chest. This was not right. I had read a lot of scary stories back then, and I had watched and listened to my fair share of spooky stories as well. At the time, I didn't think any of this was real. But what was happening to me felt way too familiar, and it was setting off many alarm bells. Something about this exact situation was tugging at the back of my mind as something I should be terrified of. I tried one more time. What's your name? I asked cautiously. Help, the voice called. It couldn't have been more than a few yards off now. That was enough for me to swap my light to my left hand and bring out the Colt with my right. I pointed both in the direction of that voice and finally caught a glimpse of something besides the trees. Off in the distance, barely visible, I could see a bundle of something laying in the snow. It was human-sized, and the snow all around it was stained dark. My head was in the middle of processing what it was seeing when I saw movement between me and the body. Oh crap, that was a body. I pointed my flashlight and gun at the source of the movement. It was humanoid, with 2 arms and 2 legs, but it was all wrong. The limbs were too long and it was too tall. Its hair was thin and wiry, and it had antlers, freaking antlers in its face, which was also, I assure you, really, really wrong, was stained dark with what I can only assume was blood. I fired 2 shots in its direction and I hauled it back to the road. I don't know if the bullets even slowed it down. I don't even know if I hit it. I ran faster than I had ever run before, and by the cracking branches and crunching snow behind me, it was giving chase. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest and my lungs burned from sucking in the frosty air. Once or twice, I saw death flash before me as I nearly lost my footing in the snow, but I managed to stay upright. As I ran, I heard more snapping, more crunching, not just behind me now, but from all around me. There were more of them. I got really, really lucky that night. I was lucky to have spotted the body, lucky to have run just fast enough and not fallen on my face. Lucky none of the whatever they were. I have a guess, but I would rather not hazard it. Were just a bit closer or faster. I was lucky that I had dabbled in enough spooky stories that my alarm bells had gone off. And I was lucky that the poor couple, maybe, in that Nissan had gotten stranded there and suffered the grisly fate that they had suffered. I mean, after all, I was planning to stop just as I saw those caution flashers. If I had been right there in those same woods asleep, I don't want to think about what would have happened to me if that had been the case. I made it to my car, which I was again lucky to have left on and running, thinking that I wouldn't be going too far, just a short excursion in the woods. I leapt in, slammed and locked the door shut, and I threw it in reverse as I saw dark, lanky shapes coming out of the tree line. As I got moving, the headlights revealed what had been chasing me. Now I can't say exactly how many it was, maybe at least half a dozen, but all of them were similarly stretched, pale to the point of being almost ghost white, with various forms of antlers and primitive-looking clothing. I reversed down the road as fast as I dared to, without risking going off and dooming myself to a certain death, for a good half-mile before I finally got the nerve to turn around and call it quits. And then I flew down the highway all the way back to Fairbanks, only stopping once I had found a nice and well-lit hotel deep in the middle of the city. The next day, I was back in Anchorage. I thought about calling the state troopers. Somebody was eventually going to find that Nissan, probably find the bodies too. They would find my casings, my tire tracks. I could end up a murder suspect. I decided against it though. If I ratted myself out, I would be a murder suspect anyway, and then they would know that it was me. It was better to bet that nobody could tie me to that scene, especially being as far from local as I was. Over the next week, I packed all my stuff up, bailed on my job and my lease, and I moved way back down to Texas. I never ended up with police banging on my door, so I guess I made the right choice. I still have nightmares about those wrong, elongated things chasing me. I mean, I probably have PTSD from the whole thing, but it's not really like I can talk to a therapist about it without them judging me and me ending up in the loony bin. I'm not an adventure girl anymore. I never go anywhere at night and I stay in the city as much as possible. I didn't get out of there unscathed, but I got out of there alive, which is better than can be said for the folks in the Nissan. I was lucky.